Welcome back, everyone, to the Frequency Podcast. It's been a little bit of time since we've talked to you. I'm trying to remember what the last episode we released was. I think it was our television friends, the Maines family that we were talking to last time officially, Reynold and Kathy Maines.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
I have no idea. I have no idea what the last episode was, and I feel really bad about that, but I have no recollection. And I don't know if it's because it's been time that has passed, probably, or because we do the amped interviews, which we do on our own.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if the Maines family, it seems to me that one was an amped interview because I don't remember being part of that.
Right. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
Was it Chrissy Nordoff? Was that the last one that we did?
Yeah. I think that was the last one where we talked about it. Yes. Yeah.
All right.
So I was talking about an amped interview. Yeah, you're right, Joe. You're always right.
No, I'm truly not. But I think the people who are listening, those who are left, get the point. Yeah. that they know it's been a little bit.
Now, we should say, after self-deprecating a bit and realizing how terrible we are at trying to be consistent here, it's not that we haven't been doing stuff. And actually, Joe was just recently on another podcast called the Worship Ministry Catalyst podcast that you basically brokered the conversation on that, which is so weird because I listened to a little bit of it, and we're usually the guys doing a podcast. I'm listening to you and a bunch of people from Texas.
Yeah. It was interesting. Well, it will be interesting because, cross promotion. David Lender, who ran Worship Ministry Catalyst, is in a full-time ministry position and just doesn't have the bandwidth to carry that forward. And he came to you and I and said, would you consider taking over? And we said yes. And then we were like, how are we going to make this work? Mm-hmm. We have enough trouble getting together for our own podcast. So I reached out to Gabriel Allred, who's a longtime friend of Frequency, and said, hey, you want to help with this? And he said, yes. Do you mind if I bring along everyone who works for me? and he kind of did. There's like 5 of us. And that was just first episode, episode 201. And we'll see how that goes. We're going to try to do it once a month, maybe more frequently if we can. But so I've worked on that. And I also, I'm the editor, producer, let's say, of the Worship podcast, which is used to be all about worship, but is now the Worship podcast. They approached me a little over a year ago and asked if I would take care of those duties for them, and I said yes. And so I've got a bunch of balls in the air in that regard, but this is home. And I'm really glad. I'm glad to be home. So this is cool. Yeah,
and it's neat because I think after 7 years of doing this, I think it's 7 years.
I think so.
Yeah, I think we launched officially September 2012.
Right.
But when I talk to or interact with different people or worship leaders or people who frequent the podcast world, they typically know who we are by name, but don't really know who we are as people. They'll say, yeah, I've heard of that podcast. It's like one name. It's starts with an F. And I'll be like, yeah, Frequency. Like, it's a really ambiguous name. It's just like Frequency FM. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, I've listened to a few of those episodes and, I've heard some music on it. And this review of Lauren Daigle. And I'm like, yeah, thanks. That's actually my friend and I. It's just funny to think that, after this much time, like the name's just there. But thankfully, we haven't tried to make ourselves into some popular bunch of people because we're just not. That's reality.
No. And we're getting less and less popular every year. As my hair disappears, so does my popularity as an individual.
Yeah, but the beard's really taken over. It's...
Yeah, I don't know how much longer that's going to be there. I say that every time we talk.
Yeah.
But if I'm honest with myself, this exists primarily because I had put on weight, and it was a great way to mask that.
It's the double chin cover up.
That's exactly correct. Actually, I didn't do it for that reason, but I realized that there was an extra benefit because of that. And I've dropped 10 pounds in the last 2 weeks, and I'm not sick. So
Right. You're working at it, yeah.
My goal is by the time in July birthday rolls around, I got to get a new driver's license. It'll be gone. Because I'll be proud. I'll be proud. I'm sorry. I took us completely off track. Not like we've been on track at all yet.
I think if people are listening to us this long, they already know who we are and what we're like.
Yeah, that's right.
I got back into doing worship leading in the last few months, and I realized that some of my health issues have impacted me more than I realized, because I have acid reflux, and I struggle with that more recently, and probably because I've been working, doing different things than I usually do, and renovating my house and stuff, and staying up late and not eating at the same times and stuff. And, and drinking coffee and things. But I cannot get through 5 or 6 songs. Last week, I listened back to our live stream of our set list, and I literally had to mouth the words of This We Know. And it was a realization that it's either a mixture of my age and ability, or health reasons and age, but age seems to be the common denominator. I'm just not working at it as much. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm fortunate that I don't have that. I don't have that as an issue. And I know that if my voice isn't there, it feels like a part of me is missing, because singing is so much about of who I am and my identity and what I enjoy. Yeah. That when those couple times a year when it's gone, that it just disappears. It weirds me out. Yeah. And I think a lot of us who are worship leaders or performers in some regard, that's true.
Yeah. So I want to do well when I'm leading. I want to be able to project. So I'm trying to take steps to fix that. But it is a real issue to deal with singers that overextend their voice or maybe aren't practiced enough. It is literally a muscle. You've got to work at it. So getting back into doing, rehearsal and then a practice and then leading, you're singing 25 songs within a 3-day period. And I mean like projecting in the microphone with a full band, it does take its toll. So it's one thing to consider. If you're a worship leader, you gotta rest, drink water, but you also have to work at it. Yeah, absolutely. So that was just an aside, because I was dealing with that this week and thinking a lot about it. And I was just having coffee with a friend who is a really good worship leader, and he has to work at it. And, the vocal ranges can be affected. So anyways, I digress from that. I think we should get right into our interview today, which is with a guy that we know very well in the past, if you followed the podcast. But Joe, why don't you explain? Well, Travis Thrasher, and if you've been hanging out with us for any length of time, you know that he's a frequent guest, or has been a guest a number of times, and he's a good friend of ours individually. Has his 50th book. It just released last month. It's called American Omens. And the significance of it is not just that it's his 50th book, but it seems like, as he mentions in the interview, this is a book that stands apart from some of the others that he has done for a number of reasons. And I noticed that he has been more engaged in social media about it and promoting it than I've seen him for the last several books. And so I reached out to him and we chatted probably for an hour and a half, maybe longer. And then we chatted a lot. I can also tell you that it took me a while to edit it, because he and I went off on all these tangents. I truly need to get better at this. I really need to get better at this. Anyway, so we had a great conversation. I want to note about the audio. I started out recording in my booth upstairs, so the audio was really good, but I had some issues with that, and I needed to move down to my other space, and the recording quality is not as good. So you will hear a distinct difference in the recording quality as you go through. I hope that's not too much of a distraction.
Travis's is good the whole way through. It's mine that's a little messed up. And thankfully, he's talking 90% of the time.
Right. Yes. Well, why don't we dive right into the interview that Joe did with Travis Thrasher?
Well, I know nothing about this book.
I haven't done I haven't even been trying to get fiction published in the last 3-4 years or whatever, just because in the traditional way, just because I knew I don't have the sales or the quote unquote brand. So that's why this latest book is kind of interesting, because the publisher came to me, and they actually came to a bunch of different writers with a premise. And I think basically they wanted to get the best idea. So it wasn't, I didn't know how many authors they contacted, but it was one of these things where it was basically kind of like a contest, or where, the best idea wins out.
Interesting.
And, yeah.
So you were like invited to a contest to say, okay, here's the pitch. And you respond with how you would approach that.
Yeah.
And then if you win, you get to write the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was, and they said that they were sending it out to other writers. I mean, all it was like fall of 2016. And I got an email from one of the editors at Multnomah Waterbrook. And I've known her for years, but it was like, hey, we're reaching out to different writers. And it was, they had the premise, but it was very open-ended. I mean, it was like premise a series of books about the persecuted church, in the near future. But they didn't give much. I mean, they wanted the authors to come up with different storylines, but they never even mentioned the word like a contest or this and that. But what happened was, it was like, instead of an idea being organic and kind of starting to emerge, it was like, here's a premise, go and think and give me something in a week. So I was one of the finalists, like in terms of, they had, again, I don't know how many authors, but they had a handful where I think they liked the ideas. And then they actually said, we'll give you a little money for writing a few chapters and a more detailed proposal, which is great. Yeah. I was like, okay. And, sure. But I realized the opportunity, it's not just a job, but it's a novel being published by me, like by a traditional publisher, but it's, it's not co-written, or it's not a novelization. It's one of these it's 100% me. Yeah. So I was just like, wow, this is really cool. And it ended up happening. I mean, it wasn't a series. I designed it as at least a 3-book series, and we just did the 1 book. So it really is, it is a standalone book, but obviously it ends in a way where, okay, of course this could be right. Could be another Left Behind series where, if there's enough of an interest, the cool thing would be for it to be a series. So we'll see.
The title American Omen is so provocative. And yeah, I mean, it's there's a heaviness to it. And then there's, considering let's call it the climate that we currently exist in, it's like, oh, well, what's that about?
It was originally, I originally called it Omens. And of course, the famous horror movie Omen. But that's, a lot of people, I think that's so old that not everybody would think that. But I like their suggestion of changing it to American Omens. And again, when this was pitched, this was leading up to, this was the fall of 2016. So it was Trump and Clinton, and, most of the country, I think, pretty much believed that Clinton was going to be president. I mean, even people that wanted Trump. And so, and this sort of premise was coming from New York. as far as the people in New York publishing, they saw the divisiveness in 2016. I mean, it's only gotten worse, but they saw, like, I remember, I mean, I think they were saying, okay, here's a large segment of people that this sort of book or series could appeal to. And I really tried to not make it political, but like every single interview I've been doing, it goes onto the political thing. And I don't know if there's a way for it not to be, because, if you're talking America and, and Christianity being outlawed, or in even subtle ways or so, you have to kind of talk a little politics, I think, but it's so easy for them. I think that's why people are more interested about talking about it, because they're like bringing up issues of this is happening in our country now.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, but like, I'm the last person to, I'm not one of those, I've never been political person. I am now, but I'm not the guy to go on Fox News and talk about politics. I'm not polished and articulate enough. I mean, that's why I write,
Yeah.
But
it gives you time to prepare and to put the words exactly like you want them out there.
Yes.
So what was the pitch that you made? I mean, the premise then is.
It's like they had said imagining a persecuted church where Christianity is outlawed, and one of the things they really were looking for was a big cast of characters. Now, of course, that works especially when you have a series, but I don't. What I pitched, I mean, the thing of it being, okay, it's 2038. Okay, so it's like basically about 20 years from now, and I first imagined, I mean, I changed it. One of the big plot lines was changed because I imagined this group of people warning specifically the Chicago area that God's going to be, his coming judgment is about to occur, almost like a Sodom and Gomorrah type thing.
Yeah.
And initially I wrote it where Chicago at the end of the book is destroyed. I mean, it's leveled. It's off the face of this earth. I changed that after, the editors, and we were looking and we were like, we don't think this works. And what's this even say about God and the nature of, I mean, there are a lot of issues with that, but I really kind of morphed a bunch of stuff, which was stuff, that's inside of me, stuff that's interesting, storylines. I had to be honest, I've always wanted to, ever since the movie came out, I've always wanted to, this sounds crazy, but you've talked to me, so it's not going to sound crazy to you. But I've always wanted to do a Christian version of Fight Club. No joke.
Yeah.
And where, in that movie, it's interesting because there's the big twist and it's about, the two characters. But really, I wanted to do it where this one guy kind of going through a funk and stuff is approached by another person. And basically that person is on a mission. I mean, he's basically a modern day prophet. He's on fire for God, but he's doing things in a very unconventional way. And so that idea for a story was one of these things I've had for many years. And I was able to weave that in there in a very natural way. It wasn't like I was forced to do that. And then, I love like Blade Runner, for instance. I mean, I love the original Blade Runner.
Yeah.
I love the other one that came out, 2049, I think it was. Of course, if this is a near future, and so it's futuristic, I really wove my love of those movies and storylines. And I have a guy who's he's a quote unquote FBI agent, but in the book, he is really an assassin that is killing high profile or influential Christians.
Wow.
But he's doing it, of course, in secrecy. What happened was I pitched, here's characters and this is the storyline. And then as they wanted a bigger and more, detailed proposal, I put more in it. But while I was writing, it seemed like I was still trying to figure out the core of, okay, still, what is a story for me and why am I doing it? So it was a different way of writing a novel in terms of how it usually, the idea comes, and then
you have this dystopian pitch and all these characters, assassins. Christianity is to the point where, if I heard correctly,
yeah.
it's at the point where people the idea of being a functioning public Christian is really off the table.
Yeah, like an authentic Christian, somebody who is saying Jesus Christ is the only way. I mean, the gospel is offensive to people who don't share that faith, because you're saying there's only one way, and so in the hot, there's certain hot buttons where it's like, okay, this is the line in the sand, and what if the very idea of having a bookstore and you're putting Christian books in it, like Christian classics. What I imagine is not people in the military coming and shutting it down and all that sort of stuff, but being oppressed and being eventually being forced to shut down because of that, because you are standing up for your faith. But I see it being done in a lot more subtle ways. And even like laws, I mean, when I started looking into this whole thing of, I talk a lot about hate speech. What does that look like? And, when Mark Zuckerberg, when he was before Congress, he said, there's no place on Facebook for hate speech and things that, make people feel unsafe. Well, I know threatening somebody with violence and stuff like that, that's an obvious thing. But nowadays, when you can talk about, well, this is what I believe, this is what I view, slowly and surely, if this happened here, and what if this happened here? What if technology was to be able to do this? It's all these sort of what ifs, but there are a lot of bad what ifs. But I imagine, like, even now, like, what if all of a sudden Amazon started to say, you know what, Christian books and books by Christians that are very much speaking the gospel, these things are offensive. They have no place on Amazon. Well, Amazon basically sells a majority of the books in this country. So what if they all of a sudden just decided to remove all those? These are things that I get into because, again, I'm imagining a future world where this is happening. But it's not that far-fetched to imagine some of those things happening. I mean,
it's not a big step away from where we're at.
Yeah.
At this point, it's very difficult to have a conversation, whether you're talking to somebody who's right or left or wherever they are, and to not step on a landmine that you didn't even know existed. And I don't think you're saying this as Christianity is being victimized or anything, but it's the natural. It's like a natural step where, hey, you can rationally get there without being any kind of convolution.
Yeah. Well, and this isn't I mentioned Left Behind a little while ago. This isn't an end times novel about rapture and this and that, but at the same time, the Bible, I believe the Bible says that it's only going to continue to get worse for Christians on this earth. And so could a revival happen in America? I mean, I think that is highly, highly unlikely, but God can do anything. And, and so, that as I was writing this, the whole thing for me, I kept thinking about the word urgency and I applied it to the characters, but I kept looking at myself and even asking, how urgent are you? How outspoken? And the cool thing with this book, I mean, I think it's in a lot of ways very preachy in terms of, but I could care less if somebody's like, I mean, you're going to get judged as a novelist on how you write, your skill as a storyteller. And then if you're a Christian novelist, heaven forbid, you're going to be judged on how you convey your faith, whether it's subtle or blatant or, where are you coming from? Like, I mean, it's, and I was like, you know what, this is totally me. When I say totally me, I just, one page, I'll have like a Spurgeon quote along with a Radiohead reference on the same page. And it's totally me. I mean, well, Radiohead more than Spurgeon. Spurgeon's not, but
fair enough.
Yeah. But my whole thing is just, I do believe that there are a lot of people that they would say, well, I'm a Christian. I mean, I believe in God. Yeah. Okay. So is this thing authentic though? And to some people, I don't know if it really is authentic, if they really truly, understand the Bible, understand if they have an authentic faith in Jesus Christ and what that means. And so I go back to that word urgency. And so in writing this, it's imagining this future. And in some ways it was cool to write about it, but also, I mean, after a while, it was kind of heavy. It was kind of depressing because it's like, I mean, it's, would not be a good thing to have to live through. And, but I'm ultimately kind of trying to see three different viewpoints, like a Christian's viewpoint, somebody who's possibly searching, and somebody who is very much anti-God, very much doesn't believe it. And, so that's this strange journey to how kind of American Omens even came to life. It'll be interesting to see if it is done into a series, because man, it's like I have all these other stories, plot lines, and characters that I imagined, but you never know.
To bring us back around, in the case of American Omens, at least from what I understand so far, and just kind of seeing, we'll call it buzz.
Yes.
That it's doing what it's supposed to do. People are getting excited about it. And I see the list of comments in the post, that you have where people who follow you are like, wait a minute.
Yeah. And
there's excitement. When is that? Is it already out, or is it coming out soon?
Yeah, it actually officially released yesterday.
Okay.
And the fun thing about this one, the publisher told me a while ago that Walmart took a bunch of copies and they did a special edition. Yes, technically yesterday it was the official release date. Really, it's almost like a campaign where it's I counted it up. This is actually my official 50th book published, and that's co-written, ghostwritten. By about book 6 or 7, friends and family start to get a little annoyed when you keep saying, "Oh, the new release, come to my signing." People are like, "Oh, for the love." So I really have tried not to inundate friends and family too much. But with this one, I'm like, look, it's been a while. I want you, if you know me, I go buy a copy. Please, I won't annoy you again, but I think this book is worth doing that. But I look at it as like a campaign, meaning, it's not like I do media and talk about it for a couple of weeks and then I forget about it. To me, I see doing more books, and hopefully the publisher will see the same thing.
It does well enough. Who knows how many more there will be? American Omens 2, 3.
Yes. And, it's American Omens is a good, the big title, and then I've got the titles, and the ideas are endless. my two other series I had, the two YA series, the first was a Solitary Tales. That was one story divided into 4 chunks. And I like doing it, but I wouldn't do it now, I don't think, with a series where I end in the middle of the story, because we live in a culture now, like we can binge watch a whole series on Netflix, People don't like waiting. So this, I very much wrote it with that in mind. Like, okay, it is a complete story. You're going to get a beginning, middle, and end. So yeah, I hope people like it. It'll be fun to see.
Cool. Well, that was my interview with Travis Thrasher. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it puts you kind of in a frame of mind to want to check out that book. And he and I are actually talking about, he's trying to convince the publisher that I should do the audiobook. So I'm hoping that happens.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That would be very cool. Yeah. And I loved this, how he came into that book. It was just kind of a unique way for somebody to get an opportunity. And I hope that it does well enough that it results in other books. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
No, definitely. And many people may not know that if you search Audible or you look up audiobooks, you'll find Joe Brookhouse's name.
Don't do it. I can't. There's a few good books, and there's more books that aren't so hot. But Travis has asked me to start looking at doing some of his books, and so hopefully we'll see some higher quality stuff there. But that's a topic for a complete. Yeah, you can search for me. Be prepared to be underwhelmed.
I know we all think that, but again, it's not necessarily your fault if the content isn't that good either, right?
I could always say no. That's the right.
True.
I could say no.
True. Well, and we got more coming up. I know Joe and I have talked to a number of different people for different interviews that are coming up. Specifically, I've spoken with an author, Dan Darling. He's actually part of Russell Moore's ministry with the Religious Liberty Commission. Well, basically it's an arm of the Southern Baptist Convention, but Dan's done a really good job of being very quiet about being a good author. He's actually written a number of books, but there was really not a lot of traction until recently. And I had the blessing of hanging out with him a couple of years ago. We hosted a conference, and he sat at my desk and worked at my desk and actually resigned from his position at my desk.
Wow.
I found out afterwards that he was actually changing from being a pastor to working for Russell Moore, and used my computer to send it. It's funny when I look back at
very surreal, surreal
at how relationships develop, and borrowed my van, drove around PEI, and so
wrecked it into a ditch.
Yeah, that's
guy's
right.
a jerk.
The cool thing about PEI is when people come here, I mean, it's all fresh and new, and we've got Anne of Green Gables and there's tourism type things. So when people come, it's usually pretty easy to entertain somebody that comes, especially when they're so enthusiastic about something new and fresh. And of course, Canada's, a fun, safe place to be for the most part. So anyways, long story short, we know Dan, and we'll be able to have a pretty good, candid conversation. And the book, The Dignity Revolution, is an incredible book, and especially for where things are at in the United States. And it'll be an interesting conversation, because not only did he write that book, but the whole ministry with Russell Moore and with what's happening in SBC and TGC and T4G and all the different conferences, there's a lot of focus and emphasis on human dignity and abortion, and there's a lot to talk about. So I look forward to that conversation, because I think he'll provide some good, solid biblical wisdom to that.
Some nice lightweight conversation. Yeah, that sounds it's going to be wonderful.
And it's interesting though, because of the way culture's going, because in Canada, we do not value human life. In fact, it's going the other way. Not only with abortion, but also with end of life. And I know, Joe, you've had experience with that in your own family life. And, different people have dealt with different aspects of it. Canada's pretty loose when it comes to this stuff. But yeah, there's also another book I'd like to talk to. I think it's Nancy Piercy is her name. I'd like to talk to her, called Love Thy Body. It's a very articulate, theologically driven, but also medically driven. Like, there's good factual analysis. If you haven't read the book, I highly recommend it. It was my first audiobook I ever listened to, and I listened to the whole thing and did not get bored. So I also suggest for people, if they don't like to read, do audiobooks. I get through a lot more books doing audio than I ever did holding it in my hand. So there's my little plug for audiobooks.
Thanks, man. Thank you. Thanks. Well, it's a growing industry, and it's worth. There's definitely some excellent titles out there that become more accessible because they're now audiobooks. And if you exercise or run, or which is the same thing, if you're in the car driving around, or just chilling, doing the dishes, cleaning the house, whatever, it's nice to put on a book and consume that way.
Yeah. So
there's other topic. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I went through the effort of actually just getting an Audible account, and I get a book a month for free, and I've got a wish list, and I'm just sort of going through it.
No, well, I was just going to say, as we're talking about future topics, we're always open to hearing if there are artists you think we should talk to, topics you think we should address. Love to hear from you. Shoot us an email at joe@frequency.fm or dan@frequency.fm, and we'll give it a consideration.
Definitely.
And look at it for a future episode.
Yeah, so stay connected to us on social media. We're on Twitter and Facebook and all that jazz, or you can email us. But we look forward to hearing from you. And until next time, bye for now.
Tschüss.